Nationals leader David Littleproud joins me. I know you don't believe in madness, David, but farmers being kept completely in the dark about what's driving up the prices, across the country's agricultural supply chains. Farmers need to know, don't they?
Oh, they do, and they're being stitched up along with consumers. I mean, we saw a 60 to 70% reduction in sheep and cattle prices from about June. It got dry. Farmers offloaded a lot of their stock, but all we saw at the supermarket was an 8% reduction. Now, you can't tell me that their energy bill's gone up that much, that the cost of their meat hasn't come down in line with what they're paying a farmer. You look at the horticultural sector. I mean, watermelons, they're paying our farmers $1 a kilogram, yet they're charging over $4 at the supermarket. And let me tell you, someone used to pick watermelons and rock melons and chinchilla. You basically put it in a big bin and it goes straight to the supermarket from the paddock. So there's no way in the world that the diesel costs of getting it from chinchilla to a supermarket EU has gone up that much, that these supermarkets are not gouging this. We warned the government, and I made it very clear that they're undertaking a review into the grocery code that looks at the broad architecture of competition policy and what penalties they should pay and whether there's enough competition. What we called for was a price monitoring inquiry, and it done by the ACCC. That could have been done back in September, October, when we could see things weren't moving. And in fact, we would have had results before Christmas. Families would have been able to afford Christmas had this government acted. And it just shows that this government has no urgency, no understanding. They're out of touch with what the common man is feeling out in the streets. They're making real decisions, not just at the supermarkets, but wherever they go when they're spending their money, because this cost of living crisis hasn't been made overseas. It's been made here in Australia. It's been made by the ideology of this government that is driving up the energy prices and basically allowing big supermarkets to gouge not just the producers, but the consumer as well.
Well, the Greens said we don't need farmers. We've got Woolworths and Coles, and they're kind of proving their case. Now, you say Labor is letting everybody down. This Australian families, this Food and Grocery Code of Conduct review, as you say, could have been done earlier. But my worry in all of these things is we just end up with a whole bunch of well-paid Sir Humphreys going around tut-tutting and not much changes. Surely buying as close to the producer is the answer. Finding those people that are selling direct from the producer has got to be part of the answer. It's got to be good for both sides of the equation, the producer and the consumer.
Well, exactly. And what you're seeing now is that many of the large producers that had contracts with Coles and through unconscionable conduct of these supermarkets in trying to do them over, they've now gone overseas. It's more profitable for our farmers to export because of the free trade agreements that we've put in place, because Coles and Woolworths are too difficult to deal with. So we will be importing food. You'll be eating second-class food coming from another country rather than our own, because these supermarkets are trying to drive down the farmers' costs. And basically, when the costs do go up, they're not passing that through at the checkout. But when the costs do come down, they're keeping the prices up. We just need transparency. We need fairness. I'm not against companies making profits, but when your commodity is a staple that underpins life, it's food. We need it to live for our existence. We need to make sure there's transparency from the farm gate through to your plate in knowing what is a fair price and what is reasonable and what actually farmers are costing for them to produce that article to put it on your plate.
I just can't get over how the big supermarkets can get it so wrong. They threw money out and support to the Yes campaign. They were on the wrong side of that particular argument. And now it's almost like they're clawing back the cost they had in that by making the consumers pay a little bit more, a lot more, it seems, in some cases, $4 for watermelons, heavens above. Now, the Nationals, the coalition, have been calling on Labor to act swiftly on supermarkets. Dragging their feet is just not the answer. I mean, how can you actually make them do what needs to be done?
Well, and this is where you need a tough cop on the beat. And in fact, we were moving towards that before the election. We had an ACCC inquiry into perishable goods so that farmers had transparency and confidence. The recommendations of that, we'd actually implemented 2 of the 4, and the other ones had to be implemented after the election. This government hasn't done anything with that, and I've made it very clear to Andrew Leigh, the competition minister, that we'll work constructively. If they want to bring forward legislation, this is about protecting farmers and it's about protecting consumers. And what we need to do, you've got to understand the Grocery Code of Conduct at the moment is a voluntary code. Even though they've all signed up, the highest penalty is $64,000. They would pay that out of one of the tills, out of one of their supermarkets in Sydney. So it needs to start at 10 million. You need to have divestiture powers that would say to them, if you treat suppliers or treat consumers poorly, then the government has the power to divest you of things like Dan Murphy's or a BWS chain that they have. That would really make the supermarkets do the right thing. We need a cheap independent arbiter that allows farmers to come forward without worry of retribution, because they do fear retribution for the big supermarkets. They'll lose their contracts if they raise any issues about their conduct. So this is just about fairness, about making sure there's transparency. It's about some common sense, and that's what the Nationals have said. We're prepared to deal and work quickly as we possibly can and as the government wants to, but they have to have the will. And at the moment, they haven't had the will because they haven't seen the necessity, because they don't understand how hard it is for people out there. They're just out of touch.
As you say, came out of dry weather. There's a lot of wet weather around. Talk about that. Perhaps we get a chance in a moment. But the latest news polls being drilled down seems Labor's lost polling advantage amongst female voters. I wouldn't be surprised about that. They've got a women problem now because women are seeing through them.
Well, they're invariably the ones that see the cost of living crisis firsthand. They're the ones that pay much of the bills around the country, around the kitchen tables, and they're feeling the pain. All Anthony Albanese's managed to do in just under 2 years is drive up everyone's cost of living and divide our country. He wasted $450 million on a referendum that he was warned was an overreach. It tried to conflate recognition with this another layer of bureaucracy that we'd already had before, that failed us before, and he spent $450 million on it. That could have gone into closing the gap, could have gone into cost of living measures, but instead this ideology isn't meeting the practical reality. And while we're not getting carried away with polls, the trend is showing that this government is on the nose and starting to get on the nose because their ideology doesn't meet the practical reality, and there's a lot of buyer's remorse out there at the moment.
Yeah, no, look, women see through this fast, and let's face it, blue-collar workers have walked from them. Farmers aren't interested in them because the Labor Party's not interested in them. They're following the Green playbook all the way through. David Littleproud, can I just borrow a little bit of your experience as former Emergency Services Minister? We've had some pretty big storms all around various parts of Australia, flooding, rains and all sorts of stuff. Emergency services. I heard you say this morning on 4BC that emergency services in Australia are the very best in the world. But we can all make a little bit of a difference, can't we, as individuals? Do something to make these storm problems maybe a bit easier.
Yeah, we've got to prepare. We've all got a responsibility. We live in the greatest country in the world, but we've all got to live up to a little bit of responsibility in making sure that we make the jobs of the emergency service personnel easier. And that's not just in preparation, that's when the emergency hits. If you're told to do something by them, just do it. And tragically, we lost a volunteer firefighter in Western Australia, a young man, a 20-year-old. It just reinforces the fragility of life. But what these great Australians are prepared to do for their fellow Australians. And, you know, when we've got all these people on social media, movie stars or sports stars that are meant to be our heroes, the real heroes in this country are the men and women who volunteer, who put on a uniform to help us in our hour of need. And we should just make sure we give them a little bit of respect and acknowledgement and understand we've got a role to play in helping them do their job.
Yeah, well said, David Littleproud. Thanks so much for your time. Happy New Year to you, David Littleproud, Leader of the Nationals, Deputy Leader of the Coalition.